Okay, so now we're going to finish off this lecture by talking about the Electoral College. So what I'm going to do is first describe the Electoral College and how it works, and show you how some of the states differ in the way that they count electoral votes. And then I'm going to make an argument for why the Electoral College might actually be a good thing. Most people, when they talk about the Electoral College, think it's a bad idea. The reason they think it's a bad idea is because sometimes the candidate with the fewest votes winds up winning. Now remember, when we're talking about the Electoral College, we're only talking about electing presidents. The way we elect our presidents, we do not have a direct election of presidents. If it was a direct election, what would happen is everybody would vote for president. They would count up the number of votes, and the person with the most votes would win. That would be a direct election where people vote directly for the officials. That's not what happens in the Electoral College. When we vote, in essence, what we're citizens in each state, when we vote, we're voting for electors. Now, if you recall, when I talked about the Electoral College previously in the discussion, when we talked about the Constitution, the way it used to work is that a candidate would go, a community would get together, and they would go ahead and they would elect somebody to be their elector. And then that elector, the person who was going to represent the community, would go to the state capitol and debate with other people about who he or she, well, he back then, he wanted to be president. And then they would vote. The electors would vote. Well, even though it doesn't work that way anymore, when we're voting, we're really still voting for electors, and each elector has one vote. When in California, for example, Barack Obama won California in the last election, and so he won California's electors. And so after the election, those electors go ahead and they vote for President Obama. John McCain won Texas. The people in Texas who were the electors, they went ahead and they voted for John McCain. That's the way it works. So the electors are actually the only ones whose votes matter. Our votes on the state level, they matter because it determines who won our state. But at the national level, it doesn't matter at all. Now, each state decides how it's going to select its electors. Most states, in fact 48 states, have what's called a winner-take-all system. What that means is if a candidate gets whichever candidate gets the most votes winds up winning all of that state's electors. Now, if you look at the lecture notes, it says 50% plus one vote equals candidate wins all electors. That's inaccurate. I apologize. That's not accurate. If let's imagine there were 3 people running in California. So Barack Obama gets 48% of the vote. John McCain gets 42% of the vote. And let's say Ralph Nader's running and he gets 10% of the vote. So nobody got a majority. Since Barack Obama got 48%, and that's more than anybody else, he would win all of the state's electors. In a winner-take-all system, it's not 50% plus one. Whoever wins not a majority, but a plurality, and a plurality just means the most votes. Whoever wins a plurality wins all of the state's electors. In 48 states, that's how we do it. In 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, they do it a little bit differently. And if you go ahead and you look on the lecture notes, I have a link there that I'm going to right now. I have a link there that goes ahead and shows a map of Nebraska. And what I want to do is show you sort of, if you take a look at that map, you can get an idea of how Nebraska and Maine do their electors. If you look on the map, you'll see that there are actually 3 congressional districts. There's a very big one. That's where the number 3 is. Then if you look to the right, there's a number 1. And then if you look to the right of that, there's the 2 is in Iowa, and then you can see a little line pointing to it. That's congressional district number 2. Those are 3 congressional districts, meaning that the House of that Nebraska has 3 members of the House of Representatives. Each one of them represents each one of them represents a district. Now, even though those districts are very different in size, 3 is huge, 1 is kind of smaller, and then congressional district number 2 is tiny. The population in all those three is about the same, right? Because in congressional district number 3, that big one, mostly what's there is corn. Corn and football players is what they grow in Nebraska. So that's all you got there is corn and football players that they just water and grow until they're really big. District 1, not so much. And then District 2, Congressional District 2, that's where Omaha is. And so the way it worked in the 2008 elections is that District 3, the majority of people in Congressional District 3 voted for John McCain. The majority of people in Congressional District 1 voted for John McCain. The majority of people in Congressional District number 2 voted for Barack Obama. So, think about it. We talked about this before. How many electoral votes does Nebraska have? To figure out how many electoral votes a state has, you take the number of members of the House of Representatives, 3, plus the number of senators, 2. So Nebraska has 5 electoral votes. For each candidate wins 1 electoral vote for each congressional district that they win. So John McCain in Congressional District 3 got a majority, so he got 1 electoral vote. John McCain also won Congressional District number 1, so he got another electoral vote. Barack Obama got won Congressional District number 2, and so he got an electoral vote, so now it's 2-1. Now, they have 5 electoral votes, so what do? Well, whoever gets the most votes when they add up the whole state gets those last 2 votes. So John McCain won 4 electoral votes and Barack Obama won 1 electoral vote. If they had a winner-take-all system, John McCain would have won all 5 electoral votes. So that's the way the district plan works, and each state gets to set that up themselves however they want to do it. And then again on the lecture notes it says 50% plus 1 vote in the congressional district, 50% vote in the state. Again, once again, that's wrong. It's a plurality, not a majority. Now, what are the consequences of the electoral system? Well, one of the biggest disadvantages of the electoral college is that sometimes the candidate with the fewest national votes wins. And in a way, that's like fundamentally undemocratic. It should be the case that if you're going to have an election, the person with the most votes should win. So that is a disadvantage to the electoral college. But one of the things that I want to talk about is why it might be an advantage. And I want you to skip over the magnified support of the winner. Just leave that out. I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about the second part where it says candidates have to build wide rather than deep coalitions. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about Barack Obama in 2008. When Barack Obama was running in 2008, he has to decide where he's going to campaign, where he's going to spend his money doing his advertising, where he's going to go, where he's going to talk to people. Well, as it turns out, everybody knew long before 2008 that President Obama was going to win California. He was going to win California. So if you're running President Obama's campaign and you know that you've got California sewn up, that you're going to win it because the people already support you, are you going to spend a lot of time and money in California? Other than raising money, are you going to spend a whole lot of time in California spending your resources, spending your time to go ahead and try and win votes? Well, of course not, because you already won. You know you're going to win. So what are you going to do? You have to go to other places to go ahead and try and win, to win electoral votes. So suppose you say, okay, well, you know what? The race in Pennsylvania is really close. John McCain and I are very close. So I'm going to go to Pennsylvania and I'm going to spend a bunch of money there on advertisements. And I'm going to go ahead and campaign there a whole lot. And let's say you do that, and as you spend millions of dollars there and go and you talk to people and you go to labor unions and you get everybody all excited about your candidate, then next thing you know, you look in the polls and it looks like, hey man, we're going to win Pennsylvania too. You're up by 10 points. Now you're up by 10 points in Pennsylvania. Are you going to spend more time in Pennsylvania, or what are you going to do? Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend a whole bunch of time in Pennsylvania if you know you're going to win. What do? You move on to the next state. And every time you have a state locked up, and where you know you're going to win, you move on to the next state, because it doesn't make sense to spend a whole bunch of time in California or in Pennsylvania or in New York if you know you're going to win already. The same is true for John McCain. He's not going to spend a whole bunch of time in Texas going ahead and spending money and resources in Texas, because he knows that he's going to go ahead and he's going to win. So instead of going to Texas, he's going to go to Ohio or something like that, and he's going to spend his time and his money there. If after he spends his time and money there, it becomes clear from the polls that he's going to go ahead and he's going to win Ohio, what's he going to do? He's going to move on to another state, because it doesn't make any sense to stay there, because once you know you're going to win the state, you move on to another state to try and get more votes. That's the key, is that with the electoral system, the way it's set up, candidates, once they know that they've won a state, have to move to another state to try and win that other state. So you have to build, that's why I say a wide coalition. You have to go ahead and you have to get a bunch of states to support you. If it was if it was just a popular vote, and that's why I call it a wide coalition, you have to get a bunch of states to support you. If it was a national vote, think about what Barack Obama would do. Would he bother going to some certain small states, or would he spend a whole bunch of time in California where there's a whole boatload of Democrats to try and get those Democrats to vote? Well, he'd probably spend a whole lot of time in California. There's more Democrats in California than in many other states. So instead of going ahead and going from state to state to state to try and win more electoral votes, he was just trying to stay in California and in New York and try and get as many Democrats to vote as possible. So it may be that one of the weird things that the Electoral College does, and the same thing would be true, by the way, of John McCain, although I think it's less so for the Republicans, because they're spread out wider. The Democrats, I think, could really take advantage of a national vote, because like a Democrat could just go to California, could go to New York, could go to places where they know that there's a bunch of and in urban cities, and just try and get as many Democrats out to vote as possible and stay in those locations. So that's why I call that a deep coalition. Instead of going ahead, once Barack Obama knows he's going to win California, he has to move on elsewhere because of our Electoral College. If it's a national vote, what Barack Obama will do is he'll spend a whole bunch of money in California trying to get as many Democrats to vote. Dig deep into California as opposed to having to go wide. And that's kind of an interesting consequence. I'm not saying that that's the reason why the framers set up the Electoral College. I'm not saying that there aren't some problems with it, but that is one kind of weird benefit that comes from the Electoral College. And if you have more questions about that, we can talk about that in the review session. But this ends the section on elections.